counsel and defendant are present. Could counsel, not the defendant, approach, please? All right, are we ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's bring them in, please. All right, please be seated. State, call your next witness. Good morning. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give to be the true self you got?
I do.
Thank you. And if you need some water, let us know. All right?
Thank you. I should be fine.
All right.
Thank you.
You okay?
There's another one coming,
Okay.
but yes, I'll be fine after that.
Okay.
All right.
Ready. All right. Will you state your full name for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Hal Edward McCord, Jr.
And Mr. McCord, are you retired?
I am
Where were you previously employed?
the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay. And how long were you with DHS?
About 13 years. I hired on in December of 2004.
Go ahead, let it out. And just very generically, what did you do for DHS?
I'm a computer scientist, and generally I manage people.
Okay.
Other computer scientists or computer specialists.
All right. Did you know Richard Smith?
I did.
Okay. And did you either hire him or participate in the hiring of him?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in what year did you first start working with Richard Smith?
Started working with him would have been in the 2006-2007 time frame.
Okay. And did you work with Richard up until his death in 2015?
I did.
Okay. Was Richard a computer scientist?
Yes, he was.
Okay. And were you Richard's supervisor?
I was.
Approximately how many employees did you supervise in July of 2015?
Direct reports, 15, and then government staff in general, near 100.
Okay. Right. Now, did Richard have a standard work schedule?
We had core hours, yes.
Okay, what were those hours?
Generally, they were from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon,
Which days of the week?
Monday through Friday.
Now, could those hours fluctuate?
Yes, they could.
Okay. And was Richard, was he required to be available 24/7?
Richard was a team lead, so he was the first order, contact when his staff, the people around were having issues. He would be the first level of contact, yes.
Okay, so would he need to be available 24/7?
And usually by text, he wouldn't have to be standing there.
I understand, but did
Okay.
he need to be available
Yes, he
24
did.
hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes, yes, and yes, for all 3 times you asked that.
Thank you. Now, if Richard had to take his mom or his brother John to like doctor's appointments, was he able to do things like that?
Yes, he was.
Okay, and would he have to get your approval?
Yes, he would.
Okay. Was Pensacola the only DHS location in 2015?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Are there other locations in the United States?
Absolutely.
And what about Washington, D.C.?
Yes, including Washington, D.C.
So, Mr. McCord, let me take you back to July of 2015. When was the last day that you saw Richard at work?
Tuesday of the last week of the month, he had requested time off to take his brother John to a doctor's appointment
Let me
the
stop
next
you real
day.
quick.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
question was the last day that you actually
That
saw
was
Richard.
Tuesday.
Okay. And did Richard show up for work on Wednesday, July 29th?
He did not.
Was he, had you excused him to be off that Wednesday?
I had
Okay. And do you remember for what purpose?
to take his brother John to a doctor's appointment.
Okay. Did Richard show up for work on Thursday, July 30th?
He did not.
Now, was that usual or unusual for Richard, let me finish, for Richard not to show up without some sort of contact? Was it usual or unusual?
It was highly unusual.
Okay. In the years that you worked with Richard, had he ever not shown up for work without some sort of contact?
I don't recall an instance, no.
So he was off Wednesday and he didn't show up Thursday, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did Richard show up for work on Friday, July 31st?
He did not.
Did you try either calling or texting Richard on that Friday?
I did.
Okay. And did you use his work cell or personal cell?
I used his work cell.
Okay. And what was your cell number at the time?
The last four digits, 2779.
Do you have that same number?
Still have the same number, yes.
You don't remember the other digits?
Most of the time I get them right.
Okay. But you know the last four were 2779.
Yeah,
Okay.
easy to remember.
Did you get a response from Richard on July 31st, 2015?
I did not.
Okay. And for him not to respond to you as his supervisor, was that usual or unusual?
That was very unusual.
So let's go to the morning of Friday, July 31st. Did you go to Richard's house to check on him?
Yes, I did.
Had you ever been to his house before?
No,
Did you get his address from work?
I did.
Okay. And then how did you know, did you Google how to get there?
As a matter of fact, I did.
Okay.
Google Maps.
Very good. Do you know what kind of car Richard drove back then?
A white, yes, I did.
Okay, what was it?
It was a white minivan SUV sort of. I would recognize it when I see it, but even now I don't know what it was
That's fair.
specifically, the make, model, or
Okay,
year.
very good. When you got to Richard's house on July 31st, was his car there?
The car was parked in the driveway, yes.
And approximately how long did it take you that morning to get from your work to Richard's house?
In the neighborhood of 30 minutes, perhaps a little less. But it'd be pretty close to that.
Okay. And once you left, I guess, Pensacola NAS, what was the direction that you took from there?
For me, it was, I guess that would be due west up New Warrington Road till I hit Mobile Highway, and I think Mobile Highway runs north-south there, so I was headed north on Mobile Highway till I got to Pine Forest, and then Pine Forest veers off to the right. But
Okay.
not a whole cardinal amount.
Okay. When you got to Richard's house that morning, other than his car, did you see any other cars?
Yes, there was another car that I've seen him in the past, in the driveway on the other side of his car.
All right. Now, when you got to Richard's house, what did you first do, obviously, besides park and get out of your car? Where did you go?
Okay, I parked in the driveway.
Okay.
I walked past his car.
Okay.
They had a closed-in garage on that side of the house, and there was a doorbell and a door there. So I walked to that door and I rang the doorbell.
Okay. Did anybody answer?
No, ma'am.
Where did you go from there?
Well, I actually rang the doorbell more than once. And then I walked around to the front of the house.
Okay. What did you see at the front of the house?
Same thing as I did on the side. Rang the doorbell a couple of times, listened for noises, whatever.
Okay. Did you get any response from the front door?
No, ma'am.
Did you notice anything around the front door?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you see?
there were a whole bunch of packages piled up on the porch.
Okay. From the front door, where did you go?
I went back around to the side door, tried it again, and then around to the back door, where I went through the whole same thing again.
Okay. Did you ever get a response from anybody or?
No sign of anything,
Okay.
no response, no noise.
Did you walk around the backyard at all?
I did,
Okay. And tell the jury about that.
okay. Prior to walking in the backyard, I had checked with neighbors and then made a 911 call for.
Before 911?
I did not walk around the back before. I was waiting for the officers to arrive when I walked around the back.
Okay, very good. When you
So-
walked around the back, what did you see, if anything?
Nice yard. I did not see anything. I looked behind the bushes. There were azalea bushes in the yard and a garden shed in the yard. So I looked back behind them and walked up to the back fence looking for, anything unusual in the backyard, drag marks, body, whatever was there. And there was nothing didn't seem to be anything out of place.
Okay. Did you ever see, while you were kind of walking the premises, did you ever see any broken windows, kicked in doors, anything of that nature?
No. The back door, the storm door was open. It was being held open by the deadbolt was out, but the interior door was locked.
Okay. Did you call law enforcement that morning? And I know you went around and talked to neighbors, but did you ultimately call law enforcement?
I did.
And did law enforcement arrive while you were there?
Yes, ma'am.
How many people?
2 officers arrived in 2 separate vehicles.
Okay.
Or 2 deputies arrived, excuse me.
That's okay. Did you ever go inside the Smith home that day?
I did not.
Now, once law enforcement got there, did you kind of, kind of hang back and let them do their thing?
I explained my concern, then I stood at the end of the driveway, not at the end of the driveway, but up behind the cars,
Okay.
and waited.
Okay. Now, did the deputies eventually come out and let you know that there were 3 people deceased?
No. I knew there was a problem when the EMS came out. They all looked like they had seen ghosts. They were very, they weren't chatty or anything. There was something clearly wrong. They walked off loading the truck and left. By then there were a whole bunch of other units arrived from the sheriff's department, and one of the deputies asked me to come speak to him in his vehicle.
Okay. So could you tell by what was going on, obviously there was something wrong?
I knew there was a problem.
Okay.
That was clear.
Okay.
But I didn't know what the problem was at that point.
Right. Did anyone explain to you that there were people found deceased in the home?
I was told.
Just yes or no, not what you were told.
Okay, then yes.
Okay. Now, while you were out there on Deerfield Drive that morning, did you give one of the initial deputies, Mr. Hartung's information?
Yes, I did.
And did Mr. Hartung arrive at the Smith home while you were there that morning?
Yes, he did.
Did you see how he got there?
He came in what I would have called a lawn yacht or a road yacht, a big car,
Big car, okay.
big car, 4-door.
So he drove?
He drove, yes.
Okay. Now, had you seen Mr. Hartung before this day?
I had met him once at their father's funeral several years ago.
Okay. Now, when Mr. Hartung got to the Deerfield home that morning, did he seem worried or concerned?
He got out of the car, he walked up the driveway, and he stood 4 feet or 5 feet from me. We nodded to each other and didn't really have any conversation.
Okay. When you went to check on Richard that morning, what was your actual concern?
Okay. I've known Richard for a long time. He was a big man, like my grandfather, you know, over 6 feet tall and you know, a big man. And I was concerned that he had had some sort of a medical emergency that he had, and that his family did not know how to contact us to inform us that there was an issue.
Okay.
So that is what I expected. And that was my concern going there, and that's what I expected when I got there, was that his brother and mother were fine and he was incapacitated in some way. I was concerned for him.
So your initial concern is basically his health?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my granddad died from a sudden heart attack. You know, it happens.
Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. McCord. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. McCord,
Yes, sir.
we've previously spoken, have we not?
Yes, we have.
And you recall I took your deposition,
Earlier in the year.
yes, sir, I think it was March 19th of last year. I want to ask you some questions about your testimony, and just to clarify some things for myself.
Yes, sir.
Now, you said that you became concerned because you hadn't heard from Richard Smith on Thursday or Friday. Is that concerned? Is that correct?
That's close.
Okay.
I was actually concerned Friday. Thursday, I didn't really worry about it too much.
Now, Mr. Smith, you work for Homeland Security, is that correct?
That's correct.
You're a manager there,
That's correct.
and that's on Naval Air Station, Pensacola.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Smith worked for you as, in what capacity?
He was one of my team leads for a subgroup of computer specialists.
Okay, so he was a computer specialist and was a team leader, is that?
That's correct.
And what was his GS rating?
He was a GS-14.
And when did you first meet Mr. Smith, or possibly become interested in hiring him to come to work for you at Homeland Security?
I first met him in 2005, which was my first trip down to Pensacola. And then a few years later, the opportunity came to get some highly skilled computer specialists, and he was one of a long list of people that I was looking at.
And you hired him?
I did not hire him, but I recommended his hiring.
You facilitated him being hired?
Something like that.
Okay. And he came to work for you?
Yes, he did.
And he worked for you from, what, 2007 until his death?
About that time, yes.
During that time, did you ever hear him say anything about his brother negatively, Donald?
No, sir.
Could Richard work pretty much what hours he wanted to?
A qualified yes.
If he wanted to work till 6 or 7 or 8 at night on a project or whatever he was doing, that would be okay for him to do that. Is that correct?
I would not dissuade him from that.
Did he have to check with you to do that, or was it just he could do it because he's working on whatever computer stuff he's working on?
He could do it.
And I think you said as a team leader that he was on call for 24/7. Is that the terminology you all use?
He was typically reachable, yes. for his team to reach out if necessary.
Now, when you got to the house that day, my understanding is that you got in your car and drove to his home, right?
That's correct.
And did you have the address from his personnel file?
I had the address from the recall list. I don't know if it was, I don't have a personnel file.
An emergency,
Yeah.
some kind of a contact where people are?
Yeah,
And when you got to his residence, my understanding is that you tried to get in, knocked on the door, that sort of thing, nobody answered.
that is correct.
And when I took your deposition, I asked you how many vehicles were in the driveway.
Perhaps I don't recall.
Do you remember that?
Don't remember the question. I remember how many vehicles were in the driveway.
Okay. And how many were there?
There were 2.
Okay. And was it a white minivan?
Yes, sir.
And what was the other vehicle?
I don't recall.
Did you go to the neighbor's house to see if they had access to the Smith residence?
Yes, I did.
And you used their phone to call for the deputies?
Well, not the first neighbor. I went to 2 neighbors' houses, and
Okay.
my phone clunked out at 9:30 when I called 911. It rang and then it hung up. The neighbor offered his phone, the neighbor across the street, and I called from his phone.
Okay. And you're the person then that called 911?
I called 911, yes, sir.
And then a deputy arrived, right?
2 deputies arrived.
And when they arrived, did you verify who the contact emergency contact was for Mr. Smith?
No, I did not.
May I approach the witness? It's May I approach Judge?
Yes.
If you would, sir, that's your deposition taken March of last year, correct?
Yep. We have a semantics issue here.
Okay.
You didn't ask the word, or ask the question concisely.
Very good. I apologize for not being very
But I can
concise.
explain that.
Okay. All I asked you was if you got the contact information from Mr. Smith. Did you?
I provided contact information to the deputy, but it was not an emergency contact, it was a family contact.
If I could, your answer, which is on line 18, is, and this is your answer. What's it say? The deputies asked me for...
Says, the deputies asked me for an emergency contact for Richard. I tested my office and asked for one, and they contacted back, but they didn't, it was not an emergency contact that they contacted me back with. Because his mother was the emergency contact of record.
Okay. And when you got that information, how did you get the information about his brother Donald?
It came via a text
From your office?
from my office.
They gave you the information about Donald?
Yes, they did. And I did show that information to the deputy.
Thank you. That was my next question. Then you gave the deputy the information you got from work about Mr. Hartung, Donald Hartung.
That is correct.
While you were outside the residence, you were standing there, deputies went in and you're standing outside the residence, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Hartung's outside the residence. You're both in the driveway waiting to see what's going on.
That's correct.
At some point, did the dog come out of the residence?
The dog came out. I can't remember whether he was loose. He was brought out by Mr. Hartung at some point and taken over and dropped in his car.
Wait a minute. Did Mr. Hartung go in to get the dog, or did the dog run out of the house?
Mr. Hartung went through the gate. I do not know if he went into the back door because I can't see the back door from my vantage point.
Okay.
Now, whether the dog was loose in the yard or not, I don't recall.
Okay.
But Mr. Hartung brought him out the gate and put him in his car.
And was it one of those little dogs?
Yeah, it was what I would call a lap rat kind of dog.
Okay.
Not a little, like a Chihuahua lap rat, but more like something from My Three Sons, or, one of those.
Shaggy haired dog?
Yeah, a little, but a small.
Did the dog appear to have any blood on it?
Not that I saw.
Okay. And the dog was put in Mr. Hartung's car, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, while you were there waiting to find out what happened, at what point were you told that there were bodies in the house?
I was specifically told that while I was sitting in the front seat with Investigator Hilfinger.
Is it Enfinger?
Infinger, yes, sir. Prior to that, I just assumed that there was something seriously amiss.
And at that point, did you receive any phone calls about Mr. Hartung, about Mr. Smith?
I did.
And who was that from?
Can I preface that with the rationale? While I was...
Did you receive any phone calls?
Yes, I did.
And was that from one of your bosses checking on him?
I was getting a returned call. Yes, I got a returned call from my branch chief.
Your what? I'm sorry.
My branch chief. Just another hierarchical name.
And that's a branch chief in D.C.?
That's correct.
Okay. And after that, did you then return to work?
I did.
Oh. When Richard had an office at the building he worked in, right?
That's correct.
And did he have security cameras from his mom's home or his home and his mom's home to those security cameras?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware he had security cameras?
Yes, I am.
And that he could monitor those at work?
He could monitor it from his cell phone.
Oh, okay. He could monitor the security cameras in his home when he was at work on his cell phone. Is that
On
correct?
his cell phone. That's correct.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Any redirect?
The DHS employees could not take their personal cell phones to your work area, could they?
That's correct.
Okay, so the cell phones would be left someplace other than the work area?
That's correct. They're like mailboxes, like
Mailboxes,
at the post
okay.
office.
But outside of the work area?
Yeah, cubbies, yeah.
Okay. Now, Mr. Griffith just asked you about getting a return call from your branch chief. Had you contacted him or her, to let her know you were concerned about Richard?
I had.
Okay. And Mr. McCord, did you consider your direct reports like family?
Well, I considered everybody's direct reports as if they were my family, yes.
Okay. My point is, the conversation to the branch chief was out of concern for Richard's
It was
health.
out of concern for, and I looked at my notes the other day from contemporaneous notes, and my concern, as I stated to her, was that, we may have to report something to HR, I'm concerned
Because of Richard's health?
because of the possibility that Richard was in poor health.
Okay. Now, I just want to clarify, you said Richard's mother was his emergency contact?
Of record, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Donald Hartung was a family contact?
Actually, he was a known family member that someone went and looked up.
Okay. Okay, but the emergency contact was Richard's mother?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You got Donald Hartung's name from another employee?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Mr. Griffith asked you about GS 14. Okay, is GS 14 a pay level?
It's a grade, yes.
Okay, and you said Richards was 14?
It's a GS 14.
Okay, were your other direct reports also a GS 14?
I would say probably all of them, maybe one was still a 13.
Okay.
But as they became more experienced and over time, they get promoted.
Okay, and what was your GS 14 level?
I was a GS 15.
Because you were the boss?
Well, because I'd been around a long time.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Can this witness be released?
Subject to recall, Your Honor.
All right,
He can leave the courthouse, Judge.
all right, thank you, sir. You
We
can
have
step down.
telephone number for it.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. All right, state, call your next witness.
State calls Daryl Singleton.
Good morning.
Morning.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you state your name, please?
Daryl Singleton.
And Mr. Singleton, where are you currently employed?
I'm retired.
Okay. Do you work?
Well, I work at a little job, a part-time job at the airport.
Okay. What about your real estate?
Well, I do real estate too.
Okay. So you work part-time at the airport and you do real estate?
I do real estate.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you previously employed?
Escambia County Sheriff's Office,
How long were you with the sheriff's office?
30 years.
And what did you do for the sheriff's office?
I was a law enforcement officer. A lot of my career was done in patrol.
Okay. So let me take you to Friday, July 31st of 2015. Were you working at the sheriff's office back then?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And were you dispatched to a home on Deerfield Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
When you got there, was anyone else there?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was there?
Mr. McCord and Deputy Smith.
When you got there, did you knock on doors, windows, things of that nature?
Yes, ma'am. I tried to see if anybody was inside that was responsive, and was unable to get anybody to answer the doors.
Okay. And did you see any broken windows, kicked in doors, anything of that nature?
No, ma'am.
Did you get any response from anyone inside?
No, ma'am.
At that point, did you and Deputy Smith try to find some contact information?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and there's already been testimony that Hal McCord gave you Mr. Hartung's name.
That's how we got his name.
Okay. Now, were you there when Andrew Smith drove to Mr. Hartung's house? Meaning, were you there on Deerfield?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were you there when they both came back?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you make contact with Mr. Hartung when he came back to Deerfield Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And is this Mr. Hartung seated over here in the center of his two attorneys?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you ask Mr. Hartung about his family on Deerfield Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did he tell you?
That his mother and his 2 brothers lived there.
Okay, what else?
And we notified him that we couldn't get anybody at the door. He said, well, their vehicles are here. They should be here. They're always here. They never go anywhere. They don't have visitors. They're always here. They should be, somebody should be in the house.
Did he say who should be in the house?
Mother and the 2 brothers. He said, but the one brother should be at work, but his car's there, so he should be there.
And what about the other brother?
He said he should be home.
Did Mr. Hartung have a key to the house?
No, ma'am.
And did he say anything to you about that?
He said they were always home. He didn't need a key.
Okay. And I guess that we heard testimony, that's why the back door was, the lock was picked?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you go inside the home with Deputy Smith?
Yes, ma'am, did.
All right. Now, when you went in the back door, what did you see when you first walked in? Like, what are you looking at?
Straight ahead is the, what I thought at the time was the garage door. There's a washing machine and dryer to the left, and then the kitchen to the right.
Okay. So you walk in and you're basically looking at what you
A
thought was-
door,
Okay.
closed door.
Now, when you first went in, what is the goal at that point? Like, what are you guys doing?
Well, we're trying to see if anybody's in there, if they're in distress, or if there's any kind of burglary occurring or anything like that. We could have hostages, or a number of things, but we're just clearing the house to see why somebody's not answering the door, and they should be there.
From the back door, did you go through the kitchen and down the hallway?
Yes, ma'am, that's the path we took.
Okay. Did you go through the living room?
Yes, ma'am.
And was the TV on or off in the living room area?
It was not on.
When you went past the living room down the hallway, were there rooms down the hallway?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and were the doors open or closed?
The first door on the right was closed. The door on the left was open, and then the master bedroom was open.
Now, was there a dog somewhere around here?
Yes, ma'am, there's a dog loose in
When
the
you
house.
first went in the house, where was this dog?
He was running loose in the house.
And what did you guys do with the dog, if anything?
We gave him to Mr. Hartung outside.
All right. Now, did you go, we already heard testimony from Andrew Smith. Did you go into the room that you're describing as the enclosed garage?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you first went in there, what did you initially see?
Piles of clothes.
Okay. Was the TV on in that room?
No, ma'am.
And Andrew Smith already described the location of the bodies. But once the bodies were found, did you guys then back out of the house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And was anyone allowed to go in the house after you were in there?
No, ma'am.
Who were the only three that went in, or excuse me, who were the only people that went in with you?
It was myself, Deputy Smith, and Sergeant McNasby.
Okay.
Neesmith.
Neesmith, okay. Was this defendant, Donald Hartung, ever allowed in the house that morning?
No, ma'am, he was not.
Now, once investigators, crime scene start arriving, were you still there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what happened with Mr. Hartung?
It was really hot outside, and he showed up in an older Lincoln Town car, I believe it was, windows down and stuff. And so I asked him, I said, hey, you're obviously gonna have to be here for a while because investigators are gonna wanna talk to you. You can go sit in my cruiser if you would like to get in the air conditioner if you want.
Okay.
And he volunteered to go sit in the air conditioner.
Okay. Other than being hot, obviously, what was Mr. Hartung's demeanor?
He seemed to be nervous and stressed.
Now, let me back up. When you first went in the house, until the bodies were actually found, did you see anything obvious that made you think 3 people were dead in there?
No,
I'm
ma'am.
not saying smell, but see.
No.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Griffin?
How are you today?
Okay.
Now, when you arrive, are you the second deputy on the, Deputy Smith arrived before you?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
And then you showed up, right?
Yes, sir.
And did Sergeant Neesmith show up at the same time?
No, it was later.
Well, how long before you got there did Deputy Smith get there?
I don't recall.
Was it pretty quick?
Yeah, it would have been a few minutes. Maybe.
Minutes, okay. When Deputy Smith got there, did he get the information from Mr. McCord about Mr. Hartung?
It came later.
Okay, tell me how that came about.
Well, I tried to, Deputy Smith was talking to Mr. McCord, and I was trying to get into or get somebody to answer the door, see if there was a door open that we could go in and clear the house, that kind of stuff. And so I called the supervisor and said, hey, we may have this problem here. And he said, well, see if you can try to get in touch with some family member or something like that. And at that time, that's when Mr. McCord called his work, and we came up with Mr. Hartung's name.
And that's when Deputy Smith drove over to Mr. Hartung's house?
Yes, sir. He looked it up in our database and found out it was a few miles away, so he drove over to make contact with him, see if he was at home.
And then, as I understand, Deputy Smith came back and Mr. Hartung drove back as well?
Yes, sir.
Different cars, of course?
Yes, sir.
Now, you entered the house, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you and Deputy Smith and Sergeant Neesmith, Deputy Smith goes in the back door, and then you follow, and then Sergeant Neesmith follows. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? And there was a dog running around in the house, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you take it out and give it to Mr. Hartung?
I don't think anybody took it. I think the dog went out on its own.
You let it out of the back door?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So the dog's in the house when you get in there, and then y'all open the door and he runs out.
I'm not sure how the dog got out. I'm not gonna.
But we know he was in there anyway.
Oh, yeah, the dog was in there.
Now, you indicated that you found the dead bodies. The 3 of you found
Yes,
3
sir,
dead
we
bodies.
did.
And when you left the residence, did you tell Mr. Hartung that y'all had found the 3 bodies, or was it Sergeant Neesmith?
I actually believe it might have been Deputy Smith. So somehow we notified him.
And what was Mr. Hartung's demeanor?
He was nervous and upset.
He was shaken?
Yeah, he was upset about it.
And is that when you asked him to sit in the back seat of your car?
Well, I just knew it was going to be a long time that we were going to be there, and it was really hot. And so as a courtesy, I have air conditioning running in my car. He didn't have that luxury, I didn't believe, in his vehicle.
And where was the dog? Was it in in your car? Was it in Mr. Hartung's car?
He put it in his car that was parked on the side of the road underneath the tree with the windows down.
Okay. And then at some point, does he drive home?
Yes, sir.
And did you and investigator Infinger follow him home?
Yes, sir.
And did y'all go in his house at that time?
Yes, sir.
And did he put the little dog in his house?
Yes, sir.
Did he have any blood on him?
Who
Mr.
is-
Hartung?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not that I saw.
And after he put the dog in the house, did he go down to the sheriff's department with you?
Yes, sir. He volunteered.
Did y'all interview him at his house or just take him down to the sheriff's department?
We took him down to the sheriff's office.
And that was a voluntary trip he made?
Yes, sir. He did it on his own.
And when you got to the sheriff's department, was he taken into an interview room?
Yes, sir.
And did Deputy Infinger interview him?
Yes, sir.
Were you present for that interview?
No, sir.
Did you stay for any part of it?
I was never in the interview room.
Okay. Did you wait to drive did Mr. Hartung go in one of y'all's cars or did he drive his own car?
To the sheriff's office?
Yes, sir.
He rode in my cruiser.
Okay. Did you wait to take him back?
I waited there to see if they needed to ride back home. Yes, sir. And my shift had ended before that happened, so I left.
And did he eventually get driven home by another deputy?
I have no idea how he got home.
Okay. I don't have anything further. Thank you, sir.
Any redirect?
You said earlier that when Mr. Hartung was notified about his family, that he was nervous, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said he was upset. I mean, was he upset like he was crying?
No, he wasn't crying. I assumed, people.
Well, don't assume, just describe what you saw.
Well, he was nervous, asking about his family.
And then Mr. Griffith asked you if Mr. Hartung, if you saw any blood on him on Friday the 31st, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you said no.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you see Mr. Hartung the previous Tuesday on July 28th?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you can step down, sir. Thank you. All right, party's ready to break for lunch.
Yes, sir.
How long do you, till 1, or is that enough time?
Whatever's best for you.
Their lunch, do we know anything about their lunch status?
They should be here any minute, sir.
Okay. All right, we're gonna take our lunch break. It'll be approximately till 1 o'clock.